Into the Situation Room, retired U.S. General Stanley McCrystal, who commanded U.S. forces in Afghanistan when Bergdahl disappeared, is now commenting on Bergdahl's release. He spoke in an interview with Yahoo News. Watch this.
After Sergeant Bergdahl, then Private Bergdahl, came up missing, we did a huge number of operations to try to stop the Taliban from being able to move him across the border into Pakistan. And we made a great effort and put a lot of people at risk in doing that. But that's what you should do. That's what soldiers do for each other. So it wasn't the wrong thing to do. I think we're going to have to wait and talk to Sergeant Bergdahl now and get his side of the story.
Thanks to an unlikely source, we have new details of Sergeant Bergdahl's disappearance that the Pentagon doesn't want you to know, at least not yet. WikiLeaks obtained a classified report. See, as Brian Todd has been combing through that report. Brian, what are you finding out?
Wolf, these documents show that the Taliban very early on knew they'd gotten a gold mine with Bergdahl, and they tried to bargain for him. The top secret reports also show just how confusing the situation was on the morning Bergdahl vanished. A dramatic message in the early morning hours, June 30th, 2009. Soldier is missing. It's apparently the first report of Sergeant Bergdahl's disappearance. That report is classified, but we know what it says because it's among thousands of leaked military documents posted by WikiLeaks, chronicling the hours and days right after Bergdahl vanished in Afghanistan. The reports offer two contrasting pictures of what might have happened that day. About 5.5 hours after he disappeared, U.S. soldiers intercept a radio communication, presumably by the Taliban. The translation? An American soldier is talking and is looking for someone who speaks English, indicates American soldier has camera. But a day later, another communication from the Taliban, indicating they picked up Bergdahl in a latrine. We were attacking the post. He was sitting, taking expletive. He had no gun with him. The Army's initial conclusion is that Bergdahl left of his own free will.
The Taliban knew that they had somebody very valuable. I mean, they've kidnapped other Westerners, but they haven't kidnapped other Western soldiers.
July 1st, a day after Bergdahl's capture. According to a U.S. radio intercept, one Taliban fighter says, "I think he is big shot. That's why they are looking for him." Another says, "Can you guys make a video of him and announce it all over Afghanistan that we have one of the Americans?" The documents leaked to WikiLeaks show that early on, the Taliban wanted to trade Bergdahl for 15 Taliban fighters in U.S. custody and some money. At the same time, U.S. forces were using drones, surveillance aircraft, every asset they could deploy in a furious search for Bergdahl.
During the 7 to 9 days, probably no one slept at any headquarters. This was the constant focus. And so at the end of those days, you are just physically and mentally exhausted.
Ironically, WikiLeaks is also a key source of classified information on the other side of this case. Top secret dossiers of all 5 Guantanamo detainees who Bergdahl was traded for. They say the 5 men are all senior Taliban commanders. One had close ties to Osama bin Laden. 2 were wanted for the murders of thousands of Shiite Muslims, all of which has complicated the story of Bergdahl's capture and muddled the administration's contention that the detainees were safe to release. We cannot independently verify the authenticity of those WikiLeaks documents. Contacted by CNN, the U.S. Army would give no comment on what the documents say about Bergdahl's disappearance. Wolf.
Brian, thanks very much. Let's get some more. Josh Rogan is here. He's the senior national security correspondent for the Daily Beast. Also, our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto. Jim, what do you make of these WikiLeaks? A lot of this information about Bergdahl, we wouldn't know if it weren't for these classified documents released by WikiLeaks.
That's true. And WikiLeaks is the source of the stories surrounding Bergdahl even before his release. You know, there was talk about him having walked off the base. And many of these things, they weren't spoken about publicly because the military is sensitive to it, and they didn't want this out there as they were trying to get this guy home. And now, though, you have compounding those stories his fellow soldiers who are giving even more detail about his behavior while he was at that outpost, and more accounts of him having walked off the base. In fact, having talked about walking off the base. So, WikiLeaks was the first hint, and now we have many more accounts to buttress that claim. You've been doing some reporting, Josh, on Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, before she left the State Department, and her involvement in earlier efforts to get Bergdahl back to the United States. And there were talk of releasing Taliban detainees.
In 2011 and 2012, the State Department led an extensive effort and negotiated directly with the Taliban in a series of meetings that happened in Germany and in Doha.
When you say directly, without the Qataris involved?
The Qataris were not in the room. The Qataris had a lesser role in the process, but the American officials were meeting directly with the Taliban officials.
And so what was her role, Hillary? What was her position?
She was very intimately involved in this. She was extremely skeptical of the deal. She didn't trust the Taliban. She didn't trust the Haqqanis, and she wasn't sure if she could trust the Qataris for that matter. She had a lot of reservations about the deal, and her vision of the deal is very different from the vision that was struck by President Obama last week in two major ways. She saw it as only being relevant in the context of a larger push to make peace with the Taliban. So Hillary Clinton wanted to offer the Taliban a road towards re-entering Afghan political society. She saw this as a confidence-building measure in that context. Of course, now we can say that the Taliban Afghan war is probably going to end anyway, so maybe that's not relevant. The other thing is she had a lot of strict assurances from the Qataris that they would keep these guys under wraps until that peace was achieved. Now we don't know exactly what the assurances are, but we know that there's only a one-year travel ban. So it seems that Hillary's deal was much stricter than the deal that Obama was able to negotiate.
Because we also know, and you remember covering this, Leon Panetta, with the defense secretary, former CIA director, he didn't like this deal. General Clapper, the head of intelligence, he didn't like this deal. Hillary Clinton wasn't the only one who didn't like it, but now everyone in the administration, the new Secretary of Defense, the new CIA director, they all seem to have come on board.
They did. And like Josh made the point, David Ignatius made the point earlier, that originally this was part of a bigger negotiation. There was talk, and I remember being in Afghanistan during this time 2-3 years ago, about reconciliation. How could you get the Taliban to the table, not just to get Bergdahl back, but to end the fighting, right? And Bergdahl was going to be a sign of trust as opposed to, the end result. But it's a different time now. The president has announced that forces are going to be out in a couple of years' time, and that added to the urgency of this administration, saying that, as our troops pull out, we have less leverage, plus his value drops, right, for the Taliban, which increases the risk to his life.
You think the Qataris are really going to deliver all these assurances that the Emir of Qatar has given the President of the United States, that these individuals over the next year, 1 year, will be watched, they won't be able to cause any damage to U.S. national security?
We'll have to wait and see, but the early evidence is that these guys are roaming around Doha with little to no supervision. We don't know what intelligence assets are following them, but what we can see is that their movement is not restricted. That was one of the key details of the deal that Hillary Clinton was negotiating 2 years ago. As for the rest of the conditions, if we don't know what they are, we can't know if they're being enforced. So there'll be continued calls for this administration to be more transparent about what those conditions are so that we can reliably check to see if the Qataris are filling their end of the deal.
I'm sure U.S. intelligence is monitoring what's going on as best as they can in and around Doha, Qatar itself. Do you think the White House sort of was taken by surprise as a result of this uproar that has developed over the past few days? Because on Saturday, when the president was in the Rose Garden with the parents of Bo Bergdahl, it looked like one of those great moments an American soldier, after 5 years of captivity, was finally coming home.
I mean, they do look like they were surprised because of the depth of criticism that you've heard, particularly from his fellow soldiers. You should have known that, really, because if the stories are true that they were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements, you knew that these troops had given accounts where they had said that he did this voluntarily. So you should have predicted that this was going to happen. On the other hand, it is good news, and there is politics involved. There are politicians who, when this first happened, they were tweeting congratulations and this is great. And now they're removing those tweets as it became a political issue and as a way to stick it to the administration. So, both sides are playing something of a political game here, wouldn't you?
I would agree with everything that Jim said. I would just add one thing. In 2012, when I spoke to Senator Dianne Feinstein, she was vehemently against this deal. She actually confirmed a lot of the details of what were then classified negotiations, and the administration was very angry at her, both for revealing details and for being so publicly against the deal. So this time around, it's not surprising that they might not wanted to have clue her in advance.
When Senator Feinstein was against it, Hillary Clinton was against it, Panetta was against it, they were all against it at the time, but times change, I guess. All right, Jim Sciutto.
Thank you.
And Josh Rogan, guys, thanks very much. Just ahead, a celebration in Bergdahl's hometown suddenly canceled. But why? New information coming into the Situation Room right now.